Ron Haviv, čovjek čije su fotografije ratom razorene Bosne i Hercegovine obišle svijet, ponovo se vratio u našu zemlju. Ovaj put povod je nešto ljepši, u pitanju je izložba, ali stare fotografije uvijek bude i stara sjećanja i emocije.
Photographs can bring me back exactly to where I was, what was happening, the feel, the smell of the place. And those are very emotional moments.
Imao je 26 godina kada su počeli sukobi na području bivše Jugoslavije i ljubav prema poslu koje gradi ga je dovela u naše krajeve.
I didn't really know much about the former Yugoslavia. I read a small article in a newspaper. It said that maybe this country was going to fall apart. Nobody really knew why. And by the time I was on the train from Zagreb to Ljubljana, the fighting had already started. And once I was there, it became very apparent what was going to happen, and I felt like I wanted to see what was going to happen. So over the next 10 years, I spent more than 5 years here working in the region.
Nakon rata u Sloveniji i Hrvatskoj, na red je nažalost došla i Bosna i Hercegovina.
I was in Belgrade waiting to photograph the peacekeeping operation for the end of the Croatian War when a colleague said that the fighting had started just over the border. I arrived in this small town, not really knowing much about it. The town had been split, and the people were fighting amongst themselves. I was able to photograph for several days on the Serbian side, and then by the third or fourth day, Arkan and the Tigers arrived, and I had already known Arkan. I had photographed him during the Croatian War, and I asked for permission to travel with his soldiers as they fought, and he said yes.
Pri ranijem susretu sa Arkanom je nastala jedna od njegovih najpoznatijih fotografija.
The photograph was taken in Erdut, which was his headquarters during the Croatian War, and I was traveling with a very good friend of mine, Alexandra Boula, a French photographer, and she and I asked Arkan if we could do a portrait. And Alexandra was a beautiful woman, and Arkan was a charmer, and he said, sure, and he organized his men into the photograph. And as I was about to take the photograph, somebody handed him a live tiger that they had liberated from a Croatian zoo.
Haviv je zabilježio jedno od posljednjih trenutaka života Hajruša Ziberija, Albanca koji je živio u Bijeljini.
Well, he was essentially one of the first prisoners of the war in Bosnia, and it turns out that he was not even from Bosnia, he's from Macedonia. And he was being taken to the headquarters to be interrogated, and I went to take a photograph of him, and one of Arkan's men threw him onto the ground. And he raised his arms in surrender and was basically asking me to help him, which there was nothing that I could do. And they took him into the house. And while I was standing outside, he came out of a window and landed at my feet. And amazingly, he survived the fall from the second floor window. And then they took him back into the house. And then I went back to Bijeljina the next day. I went to the hospital, I went to the headquarters, and I couldn't find it.
Osjećaj kada saznate tužnu sudbinu osobe koju su prethodno fotografisali je grozan.
In this particular case, I was really always maintaining just a tiny bit of hope that he had actually survived. And so that hope was gone when I found out from his family that it took them 12 years with DNA to finally identify him from a mass grave.
Raditi u takvim okolnostima, a ne osjećati strah, je nemoguće.
It's very hard for me to remember a time when I didn't feel fear. This was a very scary place, and if you didn't feel fear, there was something wrong with you.
Did you have any regrets maybe for coming here?
I was very lucky. I made lots of mistakes, and I was taken prisoner, and I was arrested lots of times, but I always managed to survive. But many of my colleagues were killed or wounded. It was a very dangerous place for journalists. Of course, it was a much more dangerous place for the people living here, but this was Bosnia was a turning point in the way that journalists worked in war.
Ono što ga je najviše pogađalo jeste izostanak reakcije na njegove fotografije u smislu zaustavljanja rata.
My photographs from the fall of Vukovar to Bijeljina to the prison camps made almost no impact whatsoever. They completely failed in their attempt to tell people what was going on in terms of trying to educate people, in terms of trying to get people to do something. They did absolutely nothing. It was only after time did the photographs start to have an impact.
How did you feel about that? I suppose it was frustrating.
I'm not sure frustrating is the right word. It was very disappointing, and it was very disappointing, but totally understandable when in like 1993, the people of Sarajevo would come up to us and say, go home. We don't want journalists here. Leave us alone. And many of my colleagues agreed and said, you know, we're not doing anything. We're going to leave. And when it came for my time to make that decision, I thought I wanted to stay.
Tokom ove posjete Sarajevu ponovo je susreo Nedžibu Salihović, srebreničku majku koju je fotografisao 1995. godine u Tuzli.
Well, it was very odd to see somebody that I had photographed 20 years ago and to find out what happened to her before and what happened to her afterwards, because our interaction in Tuzla was only a moment or two. And she told me how that she remembered me taking the photograph, and I don't think she had ever seen the photograph before, but she explained how she had lost her husband, how she lost her brother, and most importantly to her, she had lost her son, and how that had affected her life, like so many mothers of Srebrenica and of course of other places in the area.
Dio vremena je proveo i u opkoljenom Sarajevu, a tu izdvaja trenutak uoči samog početka opsade grada.
One of the moments very early on that struck me during the peace, or right after the peace march, after the gunfire stopped and the special forces went up into the Holiday Inn and arrested and found the people, there was celebration, and people thought that was it. They thought that was all that was going to happen. And of course, within hours, it changed. But there was a very poignant moment there of false hope and relief that, oh, maybe we will survive from this.
Maybe 2 years ago, when you visited Sarajevo, you said you are not satisfied with the way the country is developing after the war. Do you still think the same?
I still feel that way. I think that hopefully things are changing a little bit better. It sounds like the European Union is changing their approach to Bosnia, and I'm hoping that that will have a more successful outcome for all the people here.
Od ovog utorka u galeriji 11.7.95. možete posjetiti izložbu Blood and Honey, a Balkan War Journal, u kojoj su izložene najznačajnije fotografije Rona Haviva nastale tokom ratova na području bivše Jugoslavije 90. godina prošlog stoljeća.